evening, everybody. I welcome Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, the Senior Member of Parliament, for kindly accepting our invitation, for agreeing to address this e-seminar. Sir, I thank you, sir. I'm very grateful for it. This gentleman also needs no introduction. His profile is well known to all lawyers, but I have a duty and it's my privilege to say some few words about his profile to the lawyer community. Dr. Singhvi was the chairman of Parliamentary Standing Committee of Law and Justice. He was the youngest designated senior advocate in India at the age of 34, and he was the youngest Additional Solicitor General of India when he adorned that post. He was at 37. He's a well-known author, columnist, a visible media personality. Everybody can see him on television screens day in and day out. He is the senior most serving spokesperson of the Indian National Congress, and his columns have appeared in two well-known English dailies and have been published in two books, which is called as Candid Corner and Straight Talk, both with the foreword written by the former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. He is also an occasional columnist in major Hindi dailies, which is namely Dainik Bhaskar and Rajasthan Patrika. Everybody knows that he was awarded the Global Leader of Tomorrow's Award by World Economic Forum, which was held at Davos in the year 1999. In every debates which comes from the Treasury Congress benches, he has been a forerunner, and he is the person who leads in almost every debates right from the year 2006 to till date. He has been the common factor in almost all landmark Supreme Court judgments spanning over constitutional law, corporate law, arbitration, and several other leading enactments. He supports many charities, including the Praya Center for Destitute Children and the Singhvi Scholarship at Trinity College, Cambridge. That apart, the sterling work done by him for over 12 years in Rajasthan from his MP-led funds, supporting nearly 400 projects in the field of health and education. He carries the legacy of his late father, and at my personal level, I have briefed him in many number of matters. In fact, at early times when I go to brief him, I would be wondering that whatever we brief, he will just take down in a single piece of paper, what is the impugned order, where's the page, everything he'll note down. Next day, he will be thorough with the paper book. I would be really astonished because the conference would be for 10 minutes. Next day, what we don't know, he will be telling from the paper book and the law. That is Dr. Singhvi, and he is fondly called as Doctor. Sir, once again, I thank you, sir, for accepting my invite, sir. Please address the August gathering, sir.
Ravindran, all the assembled guests, advocate friends and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Ravindran, for an extremely generous and hospitable introduction. It's very kind of you, and it's been a pleasure to work with you and your colleagues from the South. It's an interesting topic you've chosen, and most of us tend to forget that your topic has two words, not one: parliamentary democracy, because each word is pulsating and it cross-fertilizes the other. We call ourselves and are, in fact, the world's largest democracy, but we also have to say that we are the world's largest parliamentary democracy. That prefix is important. Parliament is, of course, one of the vital and main institutional pillars of our democracy. As you know, there are several non-institutional as also institutional pillars of our democracy. Sometimes the non-institutional, non-specified ones are even more important. So in that list, for example, there is secularism as a pillar of our democracy. One of the best definitions I heard of secularism was from an article of Professor Rajiv Bhargav at Harvard, who said that Lincoln, when he used the word of the people, by the people, for the people tend to ask, uh, for the people we can understand, by the people we can understand, why of the people? So he said secularism really signifies of the people, namely a sense of co-ownership, a sense of co-parcellary rights of everybody in democracy, to everybody. Without that, you cannot have democracy. Similarly, another non-institutional pillar of democracy, federalism, an amazing concept. Not the word is not used in our constitution, but it is a basic, is part of the basic structure of our constitution. It is something which manages diversities. It manages diversities in planet Earth's most diverse spot, namely India. It manages to channel the three Ds of dissent, dissatisfaction, discomfort, and channels them into manageable outlets by quarantining conflicts at the local, decentralized, or state levels. Similarly, a third non-institutional pillar of democracy would be socialism. The age-old debate, and by socialism I don't mean any ideology, but in a inherently unequally distributed wealth country like India, the concept is as to whether you will have distributive equity or growth equity, or one at the cost of the other. Not only how fast you will grow the cake, but also how well you will distribute the cake. Well, like this, as I said, there are many. But then you come to the institutional pillars of Indian democracy, and Parliament stands at the forefront. It's the paramount pillar. It is the paramount pillar of Indian democracy, along with other pillars. The Election Commission is another pillar. The Controller and Auditor General is another pillar. The judiciary headed by the Supreme Court is another pillar. The army would be another pillar. A free press, the fourth estate, is yet another pillar. So it is in this context that we discuss Parliament today. Parliament and Parliament's place in Indian democracy. That's why the context is important. Let me start, friends, before I come to my reforms, because I do believe that a reform wish list of about 10, 12, 14, 15 items, which you and I wish we could reform and make our parliament and our parliamentary democracy stronger. Before I come to that, let me start with a very simple question, with which I start some of my other lectures, both abroad and in India. And that simple question is, please ask yourself, you, each one of you, lawyers and non-lawyers, men, women, why is it that India is the only country which has remained a vibrant democracy, having emerged from the yoke of imperialism in the late 40s? As you know, between 1930s and 60s, or 1930s and mid-50s, about 30 to 40 countries emerged from British imperialism, from Dutch imperialism, from French imperialism, from American imperialism, from Belgian imperialism. These countries are scattered around Asia, Africa, South America, Australasia. Out of these 30, 40 countries, over a period of 25, 30 years, from 1930s to 1950s, all became independent from these imperial powers. But only one country, India, remains a vibrant democracy. Is it not an amazing question, an amazing facet? And if you ask me, the wrecks and ruins of constitutionalism litter the landscape across Australia, Africa, South America, and India remains a shining exception. Question is, if I ask you how, why? Well, my quick answer is, I have no answer. My second answer is, maybe sheer good luck. My third answer would be that perhaps we got the sequencing right. Sequencing means we got Gandhi before Nehru. There is no better agitational politician who could use the atom bomb of ahimsa to get us independence. Nobody else could have, with this vast power, got us independence other than Gandhi. And equally, there is no one better than Nehru, that much vilified Nehru, that Nehru who today you are told that if you sneeze, the cold is given to you by Nehru. That's what the people tell you today. Well, there is possibly no one to have that large-heartedness, that magnanimity, that spirit of democracy in him than Nehru did to preserve, embellish, and enhance our newfound democracy in 1947 and 1950. So I think this combination of Gandhi followed by Nehru is the real answer to my simple question. Well, friends, let's now turn to the topic. And what I will do is, I will give you a few preliminary points about the good fortune and the nature and the spirit of our parliamentary system. The inherent nature on how our parliament functions, and then come to my wish list for reform and tell you 10, 12, 14 points where I think we need to reform parliament. But first, friends, let me tell you, what is the essence of parliamentary democracy? The essence of parliamentary democracy in the first place is not facts, figures. It is not rules, sections, articles of the Constitution. It is the spirit which you have to understand. When I sit in Central Hall of Parliament some years ago, frequently there would be the head of party X in front, prime minister on the left, somebody on the right, and there would be a complete bonhomie and openness about speech. Can you imagine that Nawaz Sharif and Ziaul Haq can sit in the same Central Hall? Can you imagine that the 2 or 3 ladies of Bangladesh, the present incumbent and the other persons who are in opposition, can they be in the same Central Hall of Bangladesh? This is the spirit. Can you imagine that Mr. Vajpayee picks up the phone and congratulates Dr. Manmohan Singh? Or can you imagine that Sonia Gandhi picks up the phone and congratulates somebody else? This does not happen in other democracies. And these are facets of Indian democracy. Obviously, they're so common and obvious that I am referring to the obvious. But they need to be underlined and emphasized. The obvious needs to be underlined and emphasized because we take it for granted. It is this spirit of democracy which we have to preserve. That is why I'm extremely concerned that vendetta politics or a certain narrowness of thinking which has creepingly grown across the country over the years is something which is antithetical to Indian democracy. It would be the beginning of the end of parliamentary democracy to allow that narrowness to get entrenched or to allow that feeling of vendetta. I know that in one sense, your state has had that facet over the years. I know that a state in East India has had that facet. I know that it has traveled partly to a state in Northern India. But at the national level, it is unfortunately a new development. And I think it should be eschewed as quickly as possible to preserve this valuable, highly valuable facet of parliamentary democracy. Before I come to my reform wish list, let me just spend a minute on the multiple roles which Parliament plays. Parliament, obviously, the first role it plays is to pass laws. You wouldn't have a parliament if you're not passing laws. Second, it is intended to be a forum for fierce, open, and fair discussion. In that sense, it has been called the temple of democracy, and more accurately, the grand inquest of the nation. It was called the grand inquest of the nation. There is no bigger commission of inquiry under any act than our parliament. Third, it is supposed to symbolize and signify the ascent of India's humongous, diverse population to decisions of governance and legislation. So it's a symbolic assent by you and me that these laws, these decisions have our assent. And last, the grand inquest of the nation, which I said, is an extremely important role to ask, to inquire, to question, to warn, to tell you of the pitfalls, to lay down the roadmap for the future, to guide you. That is also a role of parliamentary democracy. Well, friends, having given you that kind of 2 or 3 part opening, let me straight away come and I'll do a kind of a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, threats, strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. So all will come together when I come to now, as I am starting my wish list of reform. And in the reform, you will find what is wrong and how it should be reformed. This is, of course, a private wish list. It is not something which I expect will be done immediately or in the foreseeable future. But in webinars and seminars like this, it is important to lay out our thought process, to hope for it, and eventually, slowly, with public opinion, it will be translated into result. Well, friends, my first reform is the lament I have about the fact that members of parliament in a parliamentary system of democracy, it's not a presidential system, as you know, have no power to initiate legislation. So as a member of parliament, I have no power to initiate legislation, with one exception, which is the private members bill on Friday afternoons. Now, private member bills are intended on Friday afternoons to let MPs let off steam, to get them to speak their views. But they are not law. They are never, except on 3 occasions in 70 years, they have never been passed into law. The MP speaks, people support him, but it's symbolic. Otherwise, a member of parliament does not initiate legislation. This is a big weakness, because only the government of the day, which in fact means the cabinet, alone can initiate legislation. From this follows the second point, that creativity is stultified. So if I have excellent legislative proposals, I can only suggest to the government's business and calendar is overcrowded, and they will not necessarily come up with the act which I want, or a very good, well-drafted act, or an act which I can draft better than the bureaucracy. I think this should be changed. It is not difficult to provide that legislation can and should be initiated by an MP. Now, as you know, this happens in the US, which is a presidential form of government. But to have the power to initiate, you don't need to become a presidential form of government. Even in the parliamentary system, by changes in our laws and our rules, we can give MPs the power to initiate legislation. Of course, it doesn't mean that the legislation will be passed, but why should not any member of parliament have that power? Number 2, the biggest restriction on this is the whip. Now, the whip serves 2 purposes. The first part of the whip is that it is routinely issued by even the ruling party for several things. Now, the whip means that it stultifies creativity. Suppose you have an excellent bill moved in parliament by Mr. Ravindran. It's very well drafted. It deserves discussion. Now, a whip is issued by the other party, be it the ruling party or the opposition, that everybody must oppose Ravindran's bill. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's a political decision. And the decision is a collective decision of the party, not of all of you. Every MP has to follow that whip. That stultifies creativity. It kills ideas. So the second point I wish to make is that the whip should be reserved for falling of governments. Yes, if you have a confidence vote or a no confidence vote, or a situation which is a money bill like a budget, or something which can lead to a fall in the government, yes, by all means, you must have a whip. But to routinely have whips, I'm talking of structural changes, mind you, friends. I'm talking of reforms which are structural. I'm talking of reforms which will change our parliamentary system for a better one without becoming a presidential system. People want sometimes say, throw out the whole baby with the bathwater and have a presidential system. I am suggesting changes which can reform parliamentary democracy from within. So the third suggestion I have is that the whip, which forces people in a herd-like mentality to vote or not to vote, which kills creativity, which compels performance irrespective of individual volition of the member of parliament. It serves a purpose. I'm not saying abolish the whip. It must be kept, but it must be restricted and limited to cases where there is a money bill or a confidence motion or a no confidence motion, and then it can have a possibility of change of government. There, yes, voting must be enforced by whip, but not for legislation. Each person should be able to express the best views, and the best legislation should then emerge. Friends, we then come to the other aspect of parliament, which is now much in the news, and that's my fourth reform. My fourth reform. What is that? It is about the malaise, the scourge, which we call defection. The Ayaram Gayaram culture, as you know, that phrase was adopted in 1967 in Haryana when an MLA called Gayalal changed three parties in the same day. On the same day, he changed three parties in 1967. So the issue about parliament is defection. And on this subject, I think all major stakeholders, I can say only with candor and respect, have mud on their face. From the governor to the speaker, from MPs to the ruling government. I'm not talking about today's government, I'm saying institutionally. And we need to root out the aberrations which have come on this constitutional sin. And for this, as you know, we decided, and the debates in Parliament in 1985, when the anti-defection law was brought in, make it clear that it's a constitutional sin. It is something where you are going against every ethical norm, being elected on the projection of a certain party and then opportunistically ditching it. Well, unfortunately, all the restrictions which by law we have created, either in our constitution or in the statutes, Indian jugaad, jugaad is a North Indian word, but I'm sure you're aware of it in the South. Indian jugaad, Indian ability to circumvent the law has nullified all the spirit and the letter of the 10th schedule. First, if a speaker wants to help you, he need not decide anything for years. So Ravindran files a complaint against X for clear defection. I am the speaker. X is valuable to the ruling party or belongs to the ruling party or supports the ruling party. Since I am the speaker, I will simply keep Ravindran's complaint pending with me for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and not decide it. By not deciding it, I'm allowing you to enjoy the fruits of your defection. The reverse is equally true. When the political equation suits you, you will decide it within 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. This is the problem. And you have some very egregious cases where I have been myself appearing. You have examples from Tamil Nadu, where the speaker's decision has been footballed for years. And it has been footballed from the speaker to the High Court, then from the High Court back to the speaker, then again it has gone to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided it by not deciding it in time. So by then, all the effect of the benefit or the adverse use of that defection was enjoyed by the people involved. The other jugaad employed by our very, very clever political persons is the jugaad of resignation. So, therefore, I engineer a defection. I get defections. And the defections are done by simply getting en masse a number of legislators not to defect, but to resign. And the resignation effectively reduces the strength of the House from, let us say, 100 to 80 or 75 or 85. It therefore creates an artificial majority for one group. That majority overturns the government or forms the government by that artificial majority. The resignees, those who have resigned, are not heard because they are offered, they're not hurt because they're offered ministerships. And they therefore effectively change the government by circumventing the defection law and also get the fruits of their constitutional sin by becoming ministers later on. Now, again, here it is very clear that this is an Indian jugaad which has rendered this whole parliamentary democracy, parliament being the heart of it, nugatory. The third vice which has come in this system, and I'll give you a solution to all of them, is the governor's post. And I have no hesitation in saying that what you are seeing currently in Rajasthan is the most extreme example of gubernatorial distortion, governor's distortion and abdication. I think unless you are frank and open, we will not realize it. And let me tell you, in law, I'm not talking politics, but law has to be stated to show how actions are completely a decimation and murder of the Constitution. Under Article 174, a governor has no powers except to call a session the moment the cabinet tells him. If the cabinet tells him a second time, there is no vestige of doubt. The governor is not a participant in the assembly. He's only ornamental, a formal gatekeeper. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly said, the governor is so nominal, symbolic, and ornamental. I'm quoting his words. I'm quoting him. He's so ornamental and nominal and symbolic that nobody will stand for the post. So we have to nominate him. Well, the governor is like a gatekeeper to a playground. He opens the gate in a formal sense, but he cannot come inside and play. He cannot ask what the agenda is, how people will vote, how they will come, how they will sit. Now, this issue arose in a judgment of the Constitution Bench, 5 judges, in Navam Rebiya's case. There is a very interesting para there which you should read, which points out that in the Constituent Assembly, the earlier version of current 174 was Article 153. And 153 said that a governor should not be bound by what the cabinet advises. Ravindran, I'm getting an echo. If you can just stop the echo.
Sir, I have done it, sir.
And you can ask some people to mute themselves because I can hear people in between. Now,
yes.
The governor in Navam Rebiya, it was noted by the court that Article 153 said that there was a proposal in the Constituent Assembly. Just imagine that the governor need not be bound and he should decide in his own discretion. And it was a strong proposal, and it might have been passed. The Assembly discussed it and said, no, we reject this proposal and we will draft it as today 174 stands. And we want the governor to be bound. I want to ask you, after this, can the governor, as has happened in Rajasthan, take more than a month to allow an assembly to be called? Well, friends, what does one do? You see, our wise framers, two framers had more wisdom than all our contemporary political class put together today. They had far-sightedness. They had a lot of depth. But nobody frames a document. Some of you are lawyers. You may frame an agreement, a contract, make legislation. Nobody frames it providing that if you sneeze on the right side, you should look this way. If you sneeze on the left side, you should look this way. Legislations, be it the Constitution of India or legislation, are all supposed to be operated in good faith. The idea is that the people who framed them assumed that those who will operate it will be statesmen, will be balanced, will be non-biased, and they will operate it in a harmonious manner. So what do you do when a governor does not do this. It's very easy to say, go to court and get embroiled. And the court issues notice and then says rejoinder and then says counter. And that 3 weeks, the governor says, now you've gone to court, the court has not decided, I'm going to do nothing. So everything was not intended to be solved by courts. It was to be intended to be solved with your maturity, my maturity, your good sense and my good sense, your balance and my balance. Unfortunately, when the protectors of the Constitution become its destroyers, no court, no system can save it. That Hindi we say, Rakshak Bhakshak ban jata hai. Who will guard the guardians? These are constitutional posts which are supposed to be guardians of the Constitution. Take another stunt. You change parties and do the constitutional sin of defection. Knowing that I am the speaker and I will disqualify you, you simply file a no confidence against the speaker. So very simple. You are going and defecting, and to disable the speaker, you file a no confidence motion against speaker. Also was decided in the same case, Nabam Rebia. Remember, the speaker is a persona designata under the 10th schedule. He is the only person who is named that he alone can decide. He cannot transfer somebody. He cannot delegate it. So, Nabam Rebia says that suppose there is old pending no confidence against the speaker, which is serious of bias, and it is under adjudication, then of course the speaker should stay his hands. But it can't be where the speaker's notice for disqualification is issued. And while that notice is pending, subsequent to that, somebody gives a no confidence motion against the speaker with the sole intention of disabling the speaker. If this was the law, it would be an ass. Because it would mean that everybody who's under disqualification proceedings by a notice from the speaker simply immunizes himself by issuing a notice of no confidence to the speaker. So these are jugards, circumventions, tricks, some of which have been dealt with in courts, but they still keep happening. About that earlier point, I said that simply, now I know that in a house of 100, you, Mr. Ravindran, has a majority of 55. I have 45. So as I told you, you simply reduce the house from 100 to 80 by getting 20 of Ravindran's people to resign. How are those people immediately after the government falls and the new government is made, how are they entitled to become ministers again? Well, they are currently in everywhere, in Karnataka, elsewhere being made ministers again. Because there's a provision in our constitution which says that who becomes a minister has to be elected in future within 6 months of becoming a minister. So you can remain a minister for 6 months without being elected to any house. Here we need a one-line amendment which says that if you have resigned and created this artificial numbers or majority, then you are barred from being re-elected as a minister or reappointed as a minister for the next 1 year or 6 months. This one-line amendment will take away the temp by these artificial numbers, by resignation, and then becoming minister all over again. And you have this provision, but not unfortunately in the defection law. You have it for what you call in the election petitions corrupt practice. If I fight a election against one of you and I lose, then I can file an election petition, and one of the grounds can be corrupt practice by you. The winning candidate is you. Well, if I make a corrupt practice allegation and if I succeed in my election petition in the High Court, then you are disqualified from fighting any election for 6 years. Just like this, we should make a one-line amendment in the anti-defection law that you are disqualified from fighting a fresh election at least for 6 months or for 1 year. So that will prevent people from taking this benefit so as to become ministers again. About the speaker. Well, you have made the speaker the persona designata. He alone can do it. Nobody else can decide. But speaker is ultimately a member of your party, isn't he? You cannot cut the cord, umbilical cord from the mother, just like that. You cannot expect a speaker both to be a member of party X and to decide objectively. And yet you have made him the sole decider of 10th schedule. This is proved to be a fundamental anachronism. It has proved to be a fundamental conflict of interest. What should you do? I'll give you a little known, very effective example. In England, I don't know if you know this, for many decades, a speaker was pre-elected. It means that before the next general elections, we decide that we want X as speaker. Let's say we want Mr. Ravindran as speaker. So, 6 or 4 weeks before elections, we decide that Mr. Ravindran should be the speaker. All the parties then decide not to put up a candidate against Ravindran. So Ravindran fights the Lok Sabha election and nobody puts up a candidate and he is elected unopposed. And he goes straight to the speaker's chair. That was the tradition in England. Now imagine the amount of stress, authority which it gives Ravindran to act like a dispassionate, objective speaker if he's elected in this fashion. Imagine. Then he can be an effective adjudicator of the 10th schedule. This happens in England, which is from where we borrowed our system. But we expect that a party man is appointed speaker, and then suddenly we expect him to turn from a crow to a swan, or from a swan to a crow. How does it happen? It doesn't happen in real life. Then, friends, my 7th or 8th reform point. I think it's time that you decide fundamentally. We are all talking about parliamentary democracy, and in parliamentary democracy, this constitutional sin of defection occupies central space. You have to decide whether defection is at all a sin or not. Innumerable Supreme Court judgments have decided it is a constitutional sin. Right or wrong, our legislature has made a value judgment. The value judgment is that you will not change, even if you're independent. Suppose I'm elected as independent. I can't change and join the AIDMK or the DMK. That is a change of party. And therefore they say that once you have decided that defection is a sin, then let us make it simple to avoid all these jugards, all these circumventions I told you. Another circumvention going on nowadays is that if you violate a whip inside the house, you are guilty of defection. But if you don't attend party meetings, if you violate a whip for attending party meetings outside the house, you are seen doing this and that, then you cannot be hauled up for anti-defection because that will be a violation of free speech. Well, friends, there are many ways to defect. Defection is not only by violating my whip on the floor of the house and joining and voting the other way. Defection is also by repeatedly not attending my party meetings. Defection is also by talking. Now, just consider this interpretation of the defection law will mean, just consider this interpretation of the defection law will mean that in a very strange case today, Mr. Pilot claims to be part of the Congress. He says there has been no voting. I am going away and living in Haryana with 19 people. I still want to be part of the Congress. I'm part of the Congress, but I won't attend a party meeting. We'll have this going on, but you have to consider me part of the Congress. How can any party function? Either have no defection. I have no problem if you abolish the 10th schedule. But so long as you consider it a constitutional sin, you can amend it again by simple change. Forget all this 2/3, 1/3. Forget the concept of split. Forget the concept of merger. As you know, originally when we started with the law, we said if 1/3 leaves, it's a split and it's allowed. Then we changed the law to say if 2/3 merge, then it's allowed. Now you have debates. Whether you have split, you have merged, whether you've gone here, gone there. Forget it. You simply have a simple 10th schedule which says from a pre-elected speaker who will be the adjudicator, a list of activities which or something similar to that which will constitute defection. You make a list, not attending party meetings twice, not voting, hobnobbing defined as so-and-so things with the opposition, going to the governor and asking for a change of government. That's your definition. But make a simple definition and get away from these technicalities so that the law of anti-defection actually works and we are not in a system of mere technicality. So today, the law of defection has been made into a zero. It was intended to be a hero for political morality. It has become a zero. Let me now come to my 11th reform. I made 10 points till now. Let's come to my 11th reform. We're talking of parliamentary democracy, and I'm giving you suggestions for strengthening, improving, and making qualitatively better our parliamentary democracy. My 11th suggestion is that the sittings of parliament are far too few. And I don't mean parliament, I include assemblies. Parliament actually is a little respectable because parliament sits for, or at least the scheduled sitting is about 4.5 months. 4.5 months in a year. But do you know the sittings of assemblies? Overwhelmingly, not more than 30 days in a year. Some have 20 days. Some have 35, 40 days. Overwhelmingly, the average is 30 days or less. So, a assembly, which is the democratic assent of the people in a democracy, which takes all decisions about democracy, sits for only 30 days a month. I think this has to change. There must be a minimum of 6-month sittings. The real problem here is not parliament, which is still not too bad, but the assemblies. But parliament also, its number of sittings should be increased. I now come to my 12th point, which is a related point to sittings, which is disruptions. Now, disruptions really make parliament look like Emperor Nero of Rome. Parliament is fiddling while the country is burning. And it's not good optics for parliament and parliamentarians to look like this. But what is the solution? We keep on lamenting, we keep on lecturing, we keep on sermonizing, we keep on giving sermons. The real problem is that the problem arises from two facets. One, the facet who will guard the guardians, because disruptions are caused by those who make the rule and the law within parliament. You and I are parliamentarians. We are the ones who we are the ones who make the rules about disruptions, and we disrupt also. The second facet is that who is willing to be unpopular? Let me explain. If you do these two facets, you can solve disruptions. Today, some of you are lawyers. I believe there are lawyers in this gathering. It's very much like the Brahmastra weapon of costs you have. In the Civil Procedure Code, you have costs. But costs are highly underutilized. It's a very potent weapon to combat adjournments and delay. It has been there from the last 150 years in our CPC. But do judges use it? Hardly. Judges don't want to be unpopular. It's now used, but very limited. Similarly, if chairpersons and political party leaders don't mind being unpopular, only 3 things are required to be done to end this scourge of disruptions. 1, proportionate cut in salary for any member of parliament or assembly who comes to the well of the house. So if I go to the well of the house, that day's salary, 1 out of 30 days, proportionately will be cut. Second, if I keep on persist on doing that more than 3 times, they are all rules you can implement. The problem is not the rule. The problem is the implementation or the lack of it. Then simply you'll have to use the marshals to first suspend for a day. Simply suspend and remove for the day. If, however, I persist and do it a second or third time, then maybe you will suspend me for the session, entire session. And thirdly, you could have a penalty that if you do this kind of behavior, you would not be considered for any post of deputy chairperson or chairperson of the parliamentary committees. These 3 simple things are already there in one sense, but nobody enforces them. The chairman would be unpopular if he enforced them. The deputy chairman would be unpopular. The political leader, party leaders will be unpopular. I think if this is enforced, you will find a change happening. It's a question of implementation, not of changing rules or laws. My 13th point relates to dilution and bypassing of parliament as an institution of democracy. by the misuse of ordinances. Ordinances. You know, there are various ways of bypassing, like you do bypass heart surgery. This is a misuse of bypass to bypass Parliament. Way back in the 70s, one Professor Vadhva made a very successful litigation on repromulgation of ordinances. He found in Bihar almost 40, 50 years ago that the same ordinance was repromulgated time and again. And the meaning of an ordinance is that parliamentary scrutiny of the law is obviated and avoided. So Parliament does not get to scrutinize it. And today, unfortunately, most important legislations, even just before Parliament is sitting, even just after Parliament has sat, even in the session period, without real urgency, are being passed through ordinances. I think this is not by Parliament, it is bypassing democracy. Ordinances have our articles 123 and 213 of the Indian Constitution provide for ordinances. They are supposed to be situations, not in the routine way just because you want to avoid Parliament. So I wait for Parliament to end tomorrow and 3 days later I bring an ordinance. That is not the object. Again, it requires the spirit of the Constitution to be operated, not merely the letter. Similarly, another bypass to Parliament, and this time very, very objectionable and illegal, is the money bill route. As you know, there is an article in our Constitution called 110, which says that when a Speaker of the Lok Sabha certifies that this is a money bill, and not the Speaker, I'm sorry, when the government certifies and then the Speaker certifies, then it will go to Rajya Sabha for discussion. But if Rajya Sabha does not agree, it will still be passed by the Lok Sabha. The final word is the Lok Sabhas. The money bill makes the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Parliament, redundant. It makes it superfluous. Now, how have you abused it? In all democracies, including England, the last word on money bills is with the lower house or the Lok Sabha. No problem with that. But what is a money bill? Article 110 tells you that it must only, there is a word only in the Constitution, which says that it should only deal with A, B, C, D, E. Otherwise, everything you can call a money bill. Take, for example, Aadhaar. Aadhaar was a bill which was dealing with basically a card. The subject matter was a card. Obviously, the card will have money expenditures, it will have to have allocations, it will have a consolidated Fund of India situation. If merely do with money, which will be involved in almost every bill, is certified as a money bill, in that case, you can completely bypass Rajya Sabha. A money bill must predominantly and almost overwhelmingly deal with money matters, like budgets, like appropriation bills. Merely because the dominant object is X, but some spending for X is also provided, that doesn't make it a money bill. The second question which arises is that there is a provision in 101 that the Speaker's declaration or certificate, this is a money bill, will make it conclusive that it's a money bill. So the question arose before the judges of the bench, the Constitution bench of Aadhaar, whether by mere certification you can immunize a bill from Rajya Sabha and immunize a bill from judicial scrutiny also. I think it's a very dissent written by Justice Chandrachud. That judgment was, of course, about Aadhaar, not about money bill. This question arose in a subsidiary manner. Justice said, Rajya cannot be bypassed in this manner by wrongly, distortedly, or falsely designating something as a money bill, which is not actually a money bill. He said this is a fraud on the Constitution. These are not my words, these are Chandrachud's words. He said it's a subterfuge. He said it's constitutionally impermissible. Debasement of democracy. Fortunately, this matter is not concluded. It has been referred to a larger bench and it is pending. And I hope and trust that what is Justice Chandrachud's dissent will become the law of the land in the very near future. Because, again, remember, for 70 years we've had this provision. But on the whole, governments have operated it bona fide, not with bias and with ulterior motives. On the whole, we have not falsely certified non-money bills as money bills to avoid upper house scrutiny. Now, just because this does not have the majority in the upper house, I would straight away charge sometimes the present government has been designating as money bills those bills which are not money bills and bypassing Rajya Sabha. And I can wager a bet with you that now that the central government has better numbers in the Rajya Sabha, this bad practice will decrease. But the point is, it should not increase when you don't have numbers in Rajya Sabha, and it should not decrease when you have good numbers in Rajya Sabha. That's not constitutional operation, and we need to therefore remember this, correct it. Well, friends, I've come to my end of my address, and I want to end in about 5 minutes asking this question of myself. I have given you lots and lots of shortcomings, infirmities, lots of question marks about the functioning and the nature of parliamentary democracy when the institution is parliament. I have suggested solutions. Well, the question is, the problems, why not switch to a presidential system? Why have a parliamentary democracy at all? Have a presidential democracy like America. At one time, it's fashionable to say so. Indian colleague Mr. Vasant Sathe was the first in the late 70s and 80s to propound it. And it was more a fashion statement. But in seriousness, it has been propounded by my good friend Mr. Sashi Tharoor hardly 1 week ago in an article. That, and he rightly, arguments are weighty. He says 5 problems of parliamentary would be solved if you had a presidential system. 1, you'll be able to get not electable people, but able people. Namely, today you need a person to be a member of parliament to be a minister. So ministerial talent means you have to be electable. And I, Prime Minister, cannot get talent if I don't make you a member of parliament. Second, this whole problem of horse trading, which I've discussed. Third, legislation suffers. The quality of legislation suffers. Fourth, disruption, which I've discussed with you. And fifth, lack of stability. Governments falling, governments being tentative, etc. Now, I'm not saying they're not weighty. I'm not saying that they're not plausible, and they have plausibility. But I would not agree with him. Why? Of course, there is an old saying of Alexander Pope, the famous American poet. He said, "For forms of governance, let fools contend. For forms of governance, let fools. Whatever is best governed is best." Ultimately, what matters is not the institution alone which you create. It does matter, the institutions you create. But what matters most is how you operate them. The best institution can be brought to its knees if that lady misuses it, operates it badly. The worst institution can be run well if I operate it bona fide. So, keeping that in mind, let me tell you why I would not agree with the presidential system. First of all, create too much. It would put our country upside down. The debate would, for presidential or parliamentary, would go on endlessly. The debate would lead to changes which would be agonizingly slow and long. During such changes, with a divide and in the present state of high division of the polity, fractured consensus, the chances of getting a consensus on this change is next to nil, is 0. But in the meanwhile, governance would be paralyzed. Nothing would happen. That's one factor. Second is that these 5 problems I have myself discussed. While being within the parliamentary system, you can control disruptions, which is one of the 5. I've just given you the answers. While being within the parliamentary system, you can improve and make more powerful your anti-defection law. I've given you 5 or 7 suggestions on that. That is while you are parliamentary democracy, not presidential. So you must reform. My whole lecture is about reform. But you must not change structurally by converting from a gender change from parliamentary to presidential. Third, electable, not able. Well, there is a provision today which allows the Prime Minister to seek talent from anywhere. He need not be a member of parliament. Within 6 months, if a party really needs him, he can be accommodated in the Rajya Sabha. You have several such cases. The present foreign minister is like that. If somebody thinks that there is some ability and not electability necessary, you can have that within the parliamentary system. Then lack of stability. Well, democracy can never guarantee stability, true democracy. Remember, the flip side of it is the inherent sentimental, structural, and normal human proclivities in India to convert presidential into dictatorship. Today, our prime ministerial system is run virtually like a presidential system. Today, nobody except one man matters. Maybe 1.5 people matter. Imagine if you actually had a presidential system, you would formalize and legitimize it. Accountability would be much less. Then my next point, madam, you just cut off the echo. In a federal, diverse country like India, in particular, presidential would be highly inappropriate. We have a planet Earth's most diverse spot, India. And I think there again, it would be inappropriate. So what I'm suggesting is strong, clear reform, surgical reform, root, branch, and tree reform, quick reform, but within the parliamentary democracy mode. Parliamentary democracy in the world's largest democracy, which we have successfully operated by and large, is something to cherish. We should not get into the trap of endless debates, endless surgery, endless changes in the name of presidential versus parliamentary. I think we can achieve 90% of our objects effectively if we do the reform, many of which I have suggested. But ultimately, it requires a maturity and a spirit much more than the letter of the law to make successful any body politic. Thank you very much indeed. I'm grateful.
Sir, thank you very much. Sir, we have before you your comrades in the parliament, your foes, everyone there. First, we will start an interactive session with a senior counsel, Mr. Navanitha Krishnan, who is also a sitting MP, sir. He would like to interact with you, sir. Navanitha Krishnan, sir.
Sir, good evening. I am Navanitha Krishnan. Good evening, sir. I am very happy
to hear your voice.
And also I have taken down your lecture verbatim. So I am having a very big note, and word by I have taken note, and really wonderful. It is informative and highly educative, and you are the competent jurist to say about our parliamentary democracy. You have rendered justice for the topic, and also you have discussed the subject threadbare. I am really thankful to you, sir. You are always with the clear cut tone, voice, and also the message is also very clear. I am not flattering you. I am telling the simple truth. The weaknesses of our parliamentary system and the strong points in our parliamentary system, and also you expressed your view that you are against the presidential form of system or government. So, and also the speaker to be elected even prior to election. That is your view, as I understood. So, it is a good suggestion and also the defection, and also our illiteracy of our Indian people and their poverty, and also the other religious sentiments and caste affection. I think I humbly feel that. And also, the people are not economically very sound. That is a very basic reason for all the defects in our system, or the ills, all the ills for our system. And definitely, I once again thank you, sir. And your lecture must be made compulsory lesson to all the law schools, because those who are interested to know the Indian democracy, parliamentary democracy, how it functions, because of all the 545 members, you are the most competent member of parliamentary democracy. At the risk of reputation, I am telling you are rendered real justice. Sir, your suggestions to reform the parliamentary system, I welcome it, sir. Thank you, sir.
Let me just say, I am overwhelmed. Navneet ji is a valued colleague. I have known him before he joined Parliament as a valued colleague of the bar. I have known him as a colleague in my house. And it's a privilege that an important, knowledgeable person like him is here and listening. I did not know that. He's used very kind words. I have watched his movement from the bar to the Parliament. I always keep joking with him that he should also spend some more time in the courts. He's very active in Parliament, but his leadership role in Parliament does not allow him to do that. So I can only thank him. He has used undeserved words. I don't deserve these.
You are deserving,
and
sir.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.